A sport with no referees, no boundaries, and the goal
Imagine a
miles
sport
away.
with no
Now the
referees,
King of England
no
declares it
boundaries,
illegal
no
under
limit
penalty
on
of
players,
imprisonment.
and where the goal could be miles away.
With no referees,
Now imagine the King of England
no
declaring it
boundaries,
illegal
no players,
under
and
penalty
the
of
goal
imprisonment.
could be miles away. Imagine
This is
sport
the
with no
story of
referees, no
medieval
boundaries,
football.
no limit on players, and
Open on the
the
chaos. Describe a Shrove Tuesday match in a medieval English town. Hundreds of men, 2 teams, 1 inflated pig's bladder. The pitch is the entire village. Streets, rivers, fields and churchyards, all fair game. Broken bones are expected. Deaths are not unheard of. And yet every year, the men come back, cut hard. A royal proclamation is read aloud in the town square. The game is banned, fines, imprisonment. The crowd looks around. Then, next Tuesday, they play again. What was medieval football? Medieval football, known by various names across England: mob football, folk football, Shrovetide football, bore almost no resemblance to the modern sport. There were no standardised rules. The number of players was unlimited. A single match could involve hundreds, sometimes thousands of participants. The pitch had no fixed dimensions. It stretched between 2 landmarks, 2 churches, 2 mills, 2 ends of a town, sometimes several miles apart. The ball, typically an inflated pig's bladder covered in leather, was kicked, thrown, carried and wrestled over by any means necessary. Punching, tripping and wrestling opponents to the ground were not fouls, they were tactics. The goal was simple: get the ball to your end. Everything else was improvisation. Matches were typically played on Shrove Tuesday, the day before the Lenten fast, making them a kind of annual ritual release valve. Communities that had been cold, hungry and confined all winter erupted into organised mayhem. The game was part sport, part festival, part territorial dispute. The royal decrees, the war of kings against the ball. Here is where the story gets remarkable. Medieval football was not merely frowned upon, it was systematically outlawed by the English crown, repeatedly, over more than 3 centuries. And yet it refused to die. Edward II, 1314. London. Forasmuch as there is great noise in the city caused by hustling over large balls, from which many evils might arise, we command that such a game shall not be practised henceforth. Edward III. 1331 and 1363 repeated bans, football alongside cockfighting and handball. The Crown's concern: men were neglecting archery practice. The military backbone of the English army. Richard II, 1389. Explicitly banned football alongside dice and other pastimes. Citizens were ordered to practice with bows and arrows on Sundays and feast days instead. Henry IV, 1401, issued a proclamation against football in London. Enforcement remained virtually impossible in rural areas, where local officials often participated in the games themselves. By the time Henry VI and Henry VIII repeated similar bans in the 15th and 16th centuries, the pattern was clear. Every prohibition was followed by the game's quiet, defiant continuation. The law could reach the town square. It could not reach Shrove Tuesday. Why did kings hate football so much? The royal objections were not merely about noise or broken bones. They were military, moral and political. The archery problem. Medieval England's military dominance, demonstrated devastatingly at Crecy, 1346, and Agincourt, 1415, rested on the English longbowmen. Training a longbowman took years of daily practice, but on Sundays and feast days, men were choosing football. Edward III's 1363 decree stated this explicitly.
But on Sundays
Football
feast
and
days,
other
many
idle
issues
games
were
were causing
Edward
men
III's
to
1363
utterly abandon
stated this
the
explicitly.
skill of archery,
Football and Edward
to the
III's
peril of the
1363
realm.
decree stated this
It was
explicitly.
not
Idle
hyperbole.
games were causing men to
England's
abandon the skill of
armies
archery
literally
to the
depended
peril
on
of the
men
realm.
being willing to practice. The riot problem. A mob football match was, structurally, a controlled riot. Hundreds of men in physical conflict, surging through narrow medieval streets, windows shattered, market stalls overturned, livestock scattered. The line between a football match and a genuine public disorder was thin, and in towns with existing tensions between guilds, parishes, or rival families, a match could escalate into something far more serious. Contemporary records describe matches ending in drawn blades and genuine bloodshed beyond the expected sporting kind. The gambling problem. Football matches drew enormous wages. An entire season's wages could change hands on a single Shrove Tuesday match. This made football not just a pastime, but an economic event, one that the Crown had no mechanism to tax or regulate. The jurisdiction problem. Most critically, the men enforcing the bans were often the same men playing the games. Local sheriffs, aldermen, and even minor clergy participated in or actively encouraged mob football as a community tradition. A royal writ issued in London took weeks to reach a Derbyshire village, and often dissolved on arrival. Violence. What really happened on the field. Let us not romanticise it. Medieval football was genuinely dangerous. Coroners' records from 13th and 14th century England document multiple deaths directly attributed to football matches. Skulls fractured by kicks. Men drowned when matches surged into rivers. Players stabbed with concealed knives when the crowds became dense enough to act as cover. A 1280 record from Algham, Northumberland, describes a player running onto another man's knife during a match. The death ruled accidental. A 1321 Cheshire inquest records a man killed when he was trampled by the crowd. These are not anomalies. They reflect a pattern in which the boundary between a sporting contest and a genuine brawl was perpetually blurred. The ball itself was sometimes a site of additional violence. Rival teams have been recorded filling pigs' bladders with pebbles or hard clay rather than air, turning a kick into a weapon. Some accounts describe teams deliberately routing matches through a rival parish's market to cause maximum disruption. And yet, here is the crucial paradox. Medieval people did not experience this the way we might. In a world where public executions were a form of civic entertainment, where warfare was a routine feature of life, and where physical toughness was a core masculine virtue, the violence of football was not a bug, it was the point. The game tested men. Communities took pride in their toughness. A village that could field a harder team than its neighbour had, in a very real sense, demonstrated something important about itself. Why didn't the people obey? Understanding why football survived every royal ban requires understanding what it meant to medieval communities and what the bans actually threatened. Football was not entertainment in the modern sense. It was ritual. The Shrove Tuesday match was a community event that reinforced social bonds, settled old scores within an agreed framework, and marked the calendar in a world defined by religious seasons. Cancelling it would have felt not like banning a sport, but like abolishing a feast day. More practically, for the poor, football was one of the only forms of recreation that required no equipment beyond the ball, no land ownership, no money. It was radically egalitarian. A craftsman's son could knock down a Lord Steward on Shrove Tuesday and face no greater consequence than he would in any other match. The game created a temporary inversion of social hierarchy that medieval people understood and, on some level, needed. The bans, then, were not experienced as public safety measures. They were experienced as the powerful taking away something that belonged to the powerless. And so they were ignored, year after year, century after century, with a persistence that, across 300 years of royal prohibition, amounts to one of the longest sustained acts of popular civil disobedience in English history. The legacy: the kings lost, the people won. In the 19th century, the reformers who created modern football, codified at Cambridge in 1848, and formalised by the Football Association in 1863, drew on a tradition that had survived all attempts at suppression. The rules they wrote were, in many ways, an attempt to domesticate what could not be prohibited. And in Ashbourne, Derbyshire, a version of carnival football is still played every year in the streets, across a stream, between two mills, with hundreds of players, no referees, and rules so minimal they would be recognisable to any 14th century player. The game for which Edward II tried to imprison people in 1314 still exists in 2024, 700 years later, still on Shrove Tuesday, still in the streets. If you found this story of the sport that refused to die fascinating, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. We cover the real, unglamorous, and often extraordinary everyday life of medieval Britain every week.